Okay, Madam Chair, we're live.
Thank you, Clarissa. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to TRW. And Vice Chairman Newsom has a bill to present in another committee, so she will not be joining us. Before us, committee, we have, I'm sorry, before that, let's take a roll call, sorry.
Representative Banks.
Here.
Representative Harrelson.
Here.
Representative Jennings.
Here.
Representative Knapp.
Here.
Vice Chair Newsom.
Excused.
Representative Sweeney.
Here.
Representative Williams.
Here.
Representative Winter.
Here.
Madam Chair Flitner.
Present. All right. Committee, before us, we have Senate File 6, Aquatic Invasive Species Inspection Enforcement. It's been a while since we've discussed this particular bill, so Director Nesvick is here to refresh our brains. And then he also has a couple of amendments, which he's going to talk us through. And I know you're busy with lunch, but y'all might want to pay close attention because things might get a little dicey here. Director Nesvick, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Brian Nesvick, Director of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. So as a refresher from the interim, clear back about a year ago, we were about this time talking about a serious concern we had with the introduction of potential introduction of invasive species into our live water with the vector of these moss balls. If you all remember a year ago, that was kind of the latest, greatest thing on the scene with quagga and zebra mussels. And we were dealing with that issue during the session last year, and we decided to look at all kinds of options that there might be to take Wyoming's stance on invasive species another step forward or another step further. And so this was approved as an interim study topic. We actually started the discussion, believe it or not, with a discussion on finding emergency funding that would help pay for the implementation of a rapid response plan if one of these mussels was found in live water in Wyoming. And that discussion evolved into looking at deterrence and more aggressive forms of ensuring people complied with our laws. And if you remember, we talked about a strict liability statute, and it evolved into what we have before us here today, which is essentially an enhanced penalty in kind of a nuanced way for folks who fail to stop at a check station and get inspected, and then are apprehended on the water and told to within 48 hours go get an inspection. And then folks who failed to do that would be punishable by this enhanced penalty. And essentially the enhancement is not an increase in the fine. In fact, it was amended to decrease the fine and the potential jail term. It's more about a suspension of voting privileges. And I'm going to talk about that. That's actually an amendment over on in Chairman Ellis's committee. This topic came up, and what they amended the bill to do was to suspend a person's privilege to be able to use state parks. And I'll wait to discuss that any further till we talk about amendments. But essentially, that's what the intent of this was. I really felt like it was continued leadership by the Wyoming legislature to show that in Wyoming, this is serious. I mean, 12 years ago now, the late, great Senator Leland Christensen really took the lead on this and led the charge and put in place the statutes that we have on the books now. He appropriated or led the charge to appropriate funding to this and basically helped us establish the program that we have here today. So with that, Madam Chair, I hope that gives a good enough background, and I would be glad at this point to answer any questions. And there is some more, like I said, when we talk about amendments to the bill, there's a little bit more to discuss there, I think. But
okay, before we proceed, are there any questions by the committee? No, let's proceed then, Director. And Chairman Ellis, would you like to come to the table if there's something you'd like to join the discussion? Sure.
Chairman.
Yes. Oh, Representative Banks, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just had a quick question, and I couldn't find this in my notes, and I've been asked. I can't remember why we decided to give them 48 hours. Can you go over that one more time? Why we gave them 48 hours if they're caught not having stopped at the check station?
Director.
Madam Chair, Representative Banks, I think that was mainly a logistical concern because it's not possible 24 hours, 7 days a week to go and get an inspection. It requires either a check station to be open or for them to find a game and fish office or a warden or biologist in the field.
Okay. Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add a few just points. I think Director Nesvick did a great job of explaining what we did with this bill, but you'll recall right now on the books, we have two possible ways that we can enforce violators of this. If someone fails to stop at a check stop, or if they launch their watercraft or their conveyance without an inspection. Both of those in statute currently are misdemeanors. They carry jail time and very hefty fines. And so I think what we're seeing out there is those laws were written at a time, I'm guessing, when that was our philosophy, was the higher the penalty, the more likely you are to deter, prevent certain activities that we didn't want happening. But by and large, I think we're all sympathetic to the fact that we have a lot of out-of-staters who come in, bring their boats. They're unaware of these duties and obligations. And so rather than slap them with heavy fines that are thousands of dollars and jail time, Game and Fish says, you know, here's a warning. Now you know. And so I think that that is understandable given the penalties there. So what this is really targeted, and you know, hopefully you'll get those numbers. I thought they were really telling. By and large, this is an effort to target our out-of-state recreators who are unaware of the fact that Wyoming has pristine waters, and we'd like to keep them that way. So hopefully Game and Fish will give you those numbers. I certainly have them. But I think that helped the Senate understand that this isn't targeted at in-state residents.
Very good.
We were also very interested in what might grab attention in other contexts. If you violate certain laws, you can have your hunting privileges revoked. And so this is kind of the same thinking, is if, you know, rather than slapping you with a heavy fine and jail time, what's a tool that Game and Fish can actually use to get people's attention? And so we thought, you know, limiting access to state parks would be a good start. And so we had that conversation on the Senate side. You'll see where we landed. But since this has moved out of the House, I think there's been more thinking about other ways we can enhance that kind of concept. Certainly limiting it just to state parks doesn't account for, you know, people who bring their boats to Alcova or Flaming Gorge. Those aren't part of our state park systems. So, you know, looking forward to the discussion you have, but I just wanted to give you a context of how this bill has evolved from when it was introduced from the interim, what we did in the Senate and what we brought to you here in the House. So happy to answer questions on any of that history.
Okay, committee questions for Chairman Ellis? Okay, thanks. I appreciate the background. Oh, wait a minute. Representative Haroldson has a question for you. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess one question I did have is how would we enforce that?
I'll leave that up to Director Nesvick. We had that conversation.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director?
Madam Chair, Representative Haroldson. So I assume what you're asking is enforce somebody who didn't have, or their privileges were revoked to enter into a state park? That's a great question. And actually that's the concern that both us and state parks has. And that's why I've brought some amendments here today, because I don't believe the way it's currently written, it would be enforceable. And there's not nearly the same tracking mechanism with state parks as what Game and Fish currently has to track people who are suspended.
Okay.
Okay, well, let's go through it and then you can interject your amendment. Nothing on page 1, right? Page 2 is where obviously this is a 3-page amendment, so you take it.
All right. So Madam Chair, the first amendment that I'll propose, and I'm going to apologize in advance. We're kind of doing a little bit of this last minute. We had some legal concerns this morning, as late as this morning. So I will talk you through this. It's everything I'm going to talk about. It's not necessarily on the page that you all have in front of you, but I will try to make this as simple as possible. So the first thing that I propose is that on page 2, line 9, striking from any all the way through the end of line 12. And that's the provision that would allow a judge to suspend somebody's privileges to go into a state park if they were convicted of this. And I have a replacement for that.
Okay.
But that's the first amendment I would propose.
And just so the committee's aware, that particular, those lines that you're suggesting that we strike, that is what was attached in the Senate.
Yes, Madam Chair, in committee.
Okay, all right. Yes, it's page 2, line 9, after 5,000, so before any, all the way through the end of line 12. So all the new language there, any through violation, correct?
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Okay, so Director Nesvick proposes that be deleted. Okay, go ahead. No, any is also struck.
So in addition, or basically as a replacement to that, would be inserted on the page that I gave you, there's a hand-drawn blue line. And so everything after the hand-drawn blue line and highlighted in yellow, and it reads, and may be refused the privilege of operating any watercraft on any of the waterways of this state for not more than 3 years. That would be inserted there to replace the language that was just struck if the First Amendment is approved.
Okay. So just so I just want to read it. So in essence, it would begin, so it's K, it's subparagraph K. Any person who is lawfully stopped by a peace officer and is subsequently discovered to have failed to have a conveyance inspected as required under subsection B of this section shall report to an authorized check station within 48 hours of being stopped to have the conveyance inspected for aquatic invasive species, notwithstanding the penalty imposed under, and it gives a statute, any person who fails to report to a check station within 48 hours as required by this subsection shall be guilty of a misdemeanor, punishable by a fine of not more than $5,000, and may be refused the privilege of operating any watercraft on any of the waterways of this state for not more than 3 years. Correct?
All correct.
Okay. Committee, is that clear? Okay. Representative Jennings?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director, could you give us a definition of waterways?
Director?
Madam Chair, Representative Jennings, essentially it's any navigable waterway in the state. It would cover, and it's private and public. So it could be a river, a stream, a lake, a reservoir, basically the way, and I can get you the exact definition and statute of waterways, but it's very all encompassing. It even includes private water. I mean, if water flows from outside of private land into private land, it's public water.
Madam Chairman,
Mhm.
follow up.
Follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So Director, how do you do that on private land? Let's say somebody comes in and they fail to do this, and then they own a section of land with a 80-acre lake.
Mhm.
How does that work?
Director?
Madam Chair, Representative Jennings. So for the purposes of watercraft enforcement and watercraft laws, you know, it's much different on private land. So we have to have permission of the landowner to be there to enforce it. Or we have to have some kind of probable cause to believe that a violation's occurred in order to go enforce it on private land. And this isn't really a common occurrence, but it's not the same threshold or the same ability to enforce it on private water as it would be on public water. However, the law would apply on private water.
But waterways is defined in statute in just that way
Yeah,
presently.
I need to look, I'll have these guys look for that, but waterways does include most everything you can think of where you could be navigable water.
Okay, follow up.
Madam Chairman. So is there a definition? Because what I'm getting at is we definitely want to protect any of our waterways that would be capable of spreading this into another waterway
Right.
and getting us into trouble there. And yet it seems to me, or it sounds to me like we'd have some issues on the private land question.
Madam Chair, Representative Jennings, there would be difficulties enforcing it on the private land. The one legal requirement is that a person entering the state has to have their watercraft inspected. Now that could be enforced on the water or off the water. If once they've launched and we know they've launched, we can enforce that statute. But you bring up a good point. If enforcement is different on private land than it is on public land. And it's even different between watercraft enforcement and hunting and fishing enforcement. Open fields doctrine applies with hunting and fishing enforcement, and it would not apply to waterways.
So Director, how does it work with, I'm thinking of Bighorn Reservoir that feeds into the state of Montana. And so any of those waterways that are on border or with border states,
Mhm.
do you share the same sort of enforcement with, say, Montana, Utah? Do you have a relationship with them that's equal to?
Yeah, Madam Chair, we do work with all of those bordering states. Flaming Gorge is another example.
Mhm.
And typically those states have very similar protective kind of laws. Our enforcement authority, though, stops at the state line. We don't have the ability to enforce laws on the other side of the state line. In the example, though, of like Bighorn, that's a state park or a national park.
Mhm.
And so the Park Service also has a enforcement authority there on both sides of the state line.
Are you allowed to go on there with the same enforcement authority?
Madam Chair, yes, we are.
Okay. And that's the only national park, I believe, right?
Grand Teton
Grand Teton,
has
right?
Jackson Lake.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and those are the ones that come to mind.
Okay. Committee, are we clear on this suggested amendment changed right now? Okay, and then there was more, subparagraph I.
And Madam Chair, I would highlight too, before we talk about this next amendment, because it's applicable, is this language, waterways of the state, is used in Title 41, which is the watercraft enforcement statute, all of the watercraft statutes. Obviously, this statute we're talking about here today is in Title 23, but we are using existing statutory language when we use waterways of the state. So this next amendment you see here that's labeled subsection I, little I, any person who operates any watercraft during the period when denied the privilege of operating any watercraft under this subsection is guilty of a misdemeanor punishable as provided in Wyoming statute. And you'll see that reference to that statute there. And essentially that provides an enforcement mechanism. So, 4 things have to happen here. Number one, somebody violates the law, maybe inadvertently, when they come in and put their boat on the water without an inspection. Potentially, if they're found on the water and told to go get an inspection and they fail to do that, that's a second violation of law, which kicks in to gear this statute. If a judge, the Game and Fish doesn't decide these penalties to suspend somebody's privileges, that's done by a judge. But if a judge then said, okay, you got a warning, you didn't do it, I'm going to take away your boating privileges for a year, this last amendment that I just talked about would cover the penalties for that. And that's aligned with existing statutes for watercraft. And we have for right now, as an example, the most serious watercraft violations carry with them potentially a suspension of your boating privileges. So let's say you're convicted of boating under the influence. A judge could say, I'm going to suspend your boating privileges for 2 years. We have a mechanism to track that. They go into a database and that's tracked so that if you contact them on the water and you run a records check, you can find out that they're suspended. That's essentially what this last amendment would cover, is to ensure that there was a mechanism for a person who then operated their boat after they had been suspended.
Okay. So the penalty provision, then there are 2. There's one in the previous one, and then there's also this one.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay. Questions, committee? How you doing, Vice Chairman Newsom?
I'm doing great. 9-0.
Oh, good for you.
Transportation, life is good.
Well, I will, Director Nesvick brought an amendment to the engrossed copy. And we're just going through that, but it's kind of, it's confusing. Let me catch her up if you guys don't mind. So it's actually taking, go to line 2 or page 2. So line 9 after 5,000. The suggestion is that we remove everything here and replace it with this, just from here to there, and then that to follow. Okay. If you want to look that over real quick, and then if you have questions. Representative Winter, do you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Turn your mic on.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. My question is, this last part of the amendment, little I, where does that go in this particular bill?
Madam Chair, Representative Winter, right after that language that we just discussed. So it's just an additional add-on to the
Okay.
bottom of the bill.
Thank you.
Okay, and then you had another piece.
Yes, Madam Chair. So at the bottom of your page, my recommendation is that I'm not exactly sure how this particular provision was put in the bill initially. All of the bills that relate to our stuff anyway, there's just an effective date. And upon the effective date, then we implement rules and regulations through the commission. And for some, this basically has that the commission would implement rules necessary to implement it before July 21, which if you do the timeline on that, number one, I think it's almost logistically impossible. We have to go through the Administrative Procedures Act, open and have open meetings and public meetings and let the public know about this. And so, my recommendation is that's struck and that we just make an effective date of January 1 of 2023. We'll implement rules after it's effective. And that would also preclude this from going into effect in the middle of a voting season, essentially in the middle of the summer, July 1. And again, this happens all the time where there's something the commission has to promulgate rules on. But we don't start that process until the bill's actually in effect.
Okay, that's clear. Committee questions on that last change? I'm just noting this. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director Nesvick, I'm going to jump back one more, and I'm going to go back to the concept of enforcement. Is there going to be some way that when either parks or game and fish have interaction with these individuals that they're aware that they've had privileges revoked? I mean, how do we know that? I mean, is there some sort of how will that come up and how will we know?
Director.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Haroldson. First of all, they'll know because the only person that can take their privileges is a judge. So they would have to happen in a court proceeding. And then once that order is entered by the courts, it goes into a record system within the state, and state parks, game and fish, deputy sheriff, state highway patrol, they all have access to that. Now it would require them to have contact with an individual and run their name through this records system, but that's how they would find out if they were suspended or not.
Okay. Committee, further questions? On this, whatever you want. Yeah, Representative Jennings.
Mr. Director, I'd like to go back a little bit more again. And because I think it's possible that we might solve this with language, because I have no issue with the bill on waterways that potentially harm our water system. But let's say you have somebody that lives to the state and to the north of us, and they get caught for this. And then they come back and I don't know, they have family reunion out on and there's I have some heartburn with telling people what they can do on their own private property. Now, if it's attached to, if the water runs into it or out of it, I understand that there's danger of this. And I understand that on the state waterways and things of that nature, I'm all for stopping that. But they go to a family reunion and there's an accident out there and the police officer comes out and they're, I don't know, running a little ski-doos, or it's winter time and they're running snowmobiles across the ice, but it's a waterway, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not a great example, but and so I have some heartburn with how we put that on private property. And that now we're going to, like I said, a family reunion or something out there, and they've got an 80-acre lake and an accident happens. Are we going to go out there and, oh, by the way, we see that you also, were you driving the ski-doo, or
Mhm.
things of that nature. So if you could think of some way of kind of making those things different, because to me, it's a personal property rights issue on that part of it.
Mhm.
I understand the interest of the state, and clearly I would support this, but that gives me some heartburn. That there's the personal property rights issue. Have you thought about that in the wording of this?
Director.
So Madam Chair, Representative Jennings, I haven't thought about it until just this last 5 or 10 minutes as you've been bringing this up. So I will tell you that the definition and statute right now of waters of the state is any waters within the jurisdiction of Wyoming. So it means basically any waters within the exterior borders of the state of Wyoming. My concern with, I'm trying to think of an example where there's a private water where there's no method of conveyance of a quagga or zebra mussel out of that private water into public water. And I can't think of any. Most of those private lakes is what I'm thinking of are fed by irrigation water. And a lot of them have to have some kind of an effluent, although they're, I can think of like stock ponds. They don't always have an effluent. They might have, it might just all go into the groundwater. But I would be concerned about not making it illegal for somebody to bring a quagga mussel on a boat and put it on any water in the state, even private.
So if you inserted like even public waterways, public before waterways, then we're getting into a whole different language thing, and especially with regard to the entirety of Title 41, huh?
Yeah, and Madam Chair, with the other thing, we'd have to define public waterways for
Right.
sure, because that's not that I'm aware of it. It's not defined in statute. And that gets into water law, and I'm not even gonna,
Right,
I don't know that well enough to be able to speak on it.
okay.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Haroldson.
Sorry, you want to jump in?
Well, I just want to say, but there's a differing, this would have to do with the watercraft has been, the person operating has broken the law.
Hmm.
And so that was when the potential contamination could have occurred.
Mhm.
But this would capture somebody 2 years later on a private lake or something of that nature that didn't have ties into the state waterway.
Mhm.
And so that's the difference that I'm trying to drive at here and think about just a little bit, that, we might want to give some thought as to how we wordsmith that, just to give that personal property rights protection. And it would have to be very specific, because like you said, a lot of waterways would spill down over into other waterways, and we don't, I'm with you on let's keep this contamination from happening. But I also I want to weigh that against people's personal property rights.
Sure.
Director, any thoughts?
Madam Chair, I don't have a great thought on how to do that, and I need to get some people that are a heck of a lot smarter than me working on that. So,
Madam Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So is there a reason why we don't have navigatable waterways in this? Because that was what we had talked about at the beginning. And just, I'm going to give a little background. I permitted with the Corps of Engineers, Game and Fish, Wyoming DEQ, and everyone else. There's like 9 agencies to build a pond on my property. And so I got to learn all sorts of cool stuff about this. And at the end of the day, navigatable waterway is any waterway where commerce could be conducted upon that waterway. So this actually originally started back when they would do log runs. They'd run logs off the mountain. So any river that would go sub-level, so obviously under every single river is an aquifer river in the state, mostly, running along the bedrock. Any river that goes sub-level is a non-navigatable waterway by state standard. So the rivers that are active running, like you're talking about, there's an affluent out of almost every one of these ponds. They'd be considered navigatable waterways usually, like the river that I have on my property. When it's a navigatable waterway, obviously that has full access and connection into the water system of the Platte or the Laramie or whatever they are, all of them coming together. And so if we put navigable waterway, that stock pond would then be exempt from with my understanding. Have we thought about if there's a reason why we haven't put navigable in there?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Haroldson, no, there hasn't, other than I would just say that navigatable water, if you have a large private pond that has an effluent, that could be not under the law, a navigable water, but that would certainly be a place where we didn't want quagga or zebra mussels. And then just as I don't know if this helps or hurts, I just got a constitutional lesson here. I don't know water law, but the Wyoming Constitution provides that water of all natural streams, springs, lakes, or other collections of still water be the property of the state.
Okay, committee for, yes.
Did that muddy
Representative
the water?
Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director, clarify for me. So little I really doesn't have anything to do with zebra mussels. This is just the penalty. If you violate anything before that, then you don't float a boat in Wyoming for 3 years, period. Do I understand that correct?
Madam Chair, Representative Williams, absolutely. That's exactly right. And my understanding of Representative Jennings' concerns and questions were with, not just the suspension, but with everything, with having to comply with these watercraft laws on water that's completely on private land. That's the way I understood the question.
Further questions?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So this isn't such an invasive species, though. I view those watercraft, whether it's on private land or private water or public, becomes a mechanism to potentially spread from even a private pond stock. So I'm not sure that you'd want to carve that out of any legislation.
Director.
Madam Chair, I'm Representative Knapp. If a private water became infested, it would be a source, I think is what you're saying. And I would agree with that. And that's the concern I brought to Representative Jennings with how we did this, that we have to be extremely careful because we don't want any of these things in the state, period.
Right. Follow up? No, okay. Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think we're in the weeds.
Mhm.
Because at the end of the day, you come into the state with a watercraft, whether you're the one in trouble or not, you still have to get it checked. You still have to get it. I mean, the point is the process is still in effect to protect waterways, be it my pond on my property or a reservoir in the county next to me. I mean, so maybe, I understand where Representative Jennings is coming from, but maybe at the end of the day, it goes back to the situation that you need to understand that you lost your privileges. I don't know. But I think that ultimately it doesn't matter if it's on a private or public water. Obviously it's public water, be it on private or public land. You still have to do everything to make sure there's no zebra mussels or aquatic invasive species on your watercraft.
Right. Okay. Further questions? Yes, Representative Winter.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director, just has the state of Wyoming detected any of these mussels in any of the waterways at the present time?
Madam Chair, Representative Winter, no, we have not.
Still being vigilant though, correct?
Absolutely. And I believe, I strongly believe that the reason we have not is because the state of Wyoming took a very strong stance on this 12 years ago and implemented these very important laws.
12 years ago, were they seeing these invasive species already in some of our bordering states? Is that what the genesis was?
Madam Chair, I don't believe it was bordering states, but it was eastern states for sure. But it slowly moved
Right.
this direction. And now we do have bordering states that have zebra and quagga mussels.
And does your agency continue to monitor pet shops and places like that, or how goes that relationship? I mean, do they still continue to sell these online, or the moss balls rather?
Yeah, Madam Chair, they, at the federal level, after the incident happened last year, they did implement some new requirements at the ports. And essentially, if they're doing some enhanced testing now at the ports for any shipments of these kind of things. And it's incumbent now upon the importer, if they are found to have any of these things on their entire container, their entire ship, they have to return it at their cost, and they're not allowed to bring any of it on shore. And there's other penalties associated with it. But federal government has stepped up to help with this a little bit as well at the national level. We are continuing to monitor. We're continuing to do testing. We know that once the larval stage enters the water, it could be as long as a year before we can detect it. So every summer, when the water temperatures rise a little bit, usually July timeframe, we test multiple waters around the state to make sure it's not there. And then we're also doing still or recently we've done the municipal water systems too, to see if it showed up from the moss ball when we had moss balls come into the state. So yeah, we're continuing to be pretty vigilant with testing.
Okay.
And really the purpose for that is we don't know of a way to eradicate it, but we think there's a potential to contain it once you do find it in some waters, probably not all of them though.
And Montana's still clean, right?
Yeah, they had I'll call it I don't think it was a false positive, but they had a water that had zebra, one of the two zebra quagga mussels found in it. One test, and then they've gone 5 years with no more, and they've tested heavily and they haven't found any more. Am I right on that, Alan? Yeah, and they haven't found more. So there's one of two things that happen there. That's just, they're so at such low prevalence, they can't detect them, or the conditions there, they were introduced by a boat, and then the conditions, either the pH or the elevation or something, wouldn't allow them to
thrive.
Yeah.
Mhm. Interesting.
South Dakota's had some waters with boat or with
Right.
one of the two. Colorado has.
Mhm. Nevada,
Yeah. Our biggest concern right now is Lake Powell.
right. Okay. Further questions for Director Nesvick?
One, Madam Chairman. So Director, help me on this, because I'm fine with the enforcement aspect of this, and I don't have any issues. We want to keep this problem away. But give me a kind of your thoughts towards a hypothetical. Someone borrows someone's boat in Montana
Mhm.
and they come down and put in I don't know, Powell level area,
Mhm.
somewhere down in there. They haven't followed the law. How does that work? Does that go to the person? Does that ticket go to the person, or is it trackable to the boat also? Just an idea of what that looks like.
Director?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Jennings, the legal requirement is the operator of the boat. So if I'm the person, doesn't really matter even who's towing the boat. Once the boat gets put on the water without being inspected, that's when the violation occurs. And that person who operates the boat is the person that has the culpability or the liability there legally.
Mhm.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Jennings, great question. And that actually happens quite often where we're doing watercraft enforcement, safety enforcement, and there's not, as an example, enough life jackets on the boat, but 3 or 4 different people have been operating it. So who's the person who's responsible? And that's where wardens have some good discretion to kind of have that discussion with the people on the boat. Who's the registered owner? If the registered owner's not there, who's been operating the boat today? And really what it comes down to in a court of law is, we have to see him operate the boat. And so whoever we saw operating the boat is the person that's going to be liable. Technically, everybody who operated the boat would be in violation. Now, that's not the way we enforce this, but
I think you need to put investigator on Jennings. He's obviously accustomed with rule breaking.
Madam Chair Lady, I don't own a boat, just to be clear before the
Okay.
committee.
All right, further questions of the director while he's on the hot seat. Okay, thank you, sir. Don't go too far.
Okay.
I see your lifelines behind you. They didn't offer to come up to the table at all. They're just
They
staying
did
back.
bring me a lifeline.
That's good. All right, I don't see, oh, come on up, state parks.
Madam Chairman, Nick Nealon, Deputy Director, State Parks. I don't have anything to add to that. I was just here in case there were any questions as this relates to state parks.
You guys are just glad to be out of it, right?
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Any questions? All right, thanks. Appreciate it. Further public testimony? All right, seeing none. Oh, is there anybody online? Okay, thanks, Clarissa. All right, with that, we'll close public testimony. Committee, what is your pleasure? Moved by Sweeney. Seconded by Williams. Okay, let's walk through it. Page 1. No changes, right? Page 2. We've gone over our suggested amendments. Would someone like to, we can move them in mass or we can break them down. Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will move the amendment striking on line 9 at before any through the end of line 12, striking that and adding in and maybe refuse the privileges of operating any watercraft on any of the waterways of this state for more than 3 years. And then also below that, putting in small I, any person who operates any watercraft during the period when denied the privilege of operating any watercraft under this subsection is guilty of a misdemeanor punishable as provided in WS 23-6202. Now, I'm still in the middle of this, so bear with me, and I'm going to throw an idea in here. On that top part, and maybe refuse the privilege of operating any watercraft on any of the waterways of this, any of the public waterways of this state.
Well,
Or are they all public waterways? So I'm sorry, I know we're back on this kind of merry-go-round here, but I'll just tell you what, I'm just going to leave it as what was written, and then we can have a friendly amendment off of that.
Vice Chairman Newsom.
I believe we were told that all water in Wyoming is owned by the state. There is no private ownership of water. So I think the way it's written is the access is not addressed here. We're addressing water. And as I understand it, constitutionally, the state of Wyoming owns all the water. They don't necessarily own the land under where the water flows, but the water is owned by the state.
And we'd have to define public waterways too. Mhm. So just before we move away from that, there was more that the agency had provided to us. Do you want to include that as well?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'll include the striking of lines 14 through 16 on page 2 and the addition 13. Sorry. Okay, it's different on this than this. Okay. On my blue copy, it's 14 through 16. On this amendment, it says 13 through 15. I'll let you ladies figure that out. But it'd be that section 2 strike. And then on page 3, the addition of except as provided in subsection B of this section. This act is effective January 1st, 2023.
Okay, been moved and seconded. Director, I just had a question for you with regard to section 2. So we would strike all of section 2. And in essence, the effective date would become section 2 with the new language.
One exception to that, Madam Chair. So with the effective date, that would be the time at which we began the formal rulemaking process. But that happens without the statute telling us to do that.
Okay,
We don't need that part of the statute to tell us to do that.
okay. So just so I'm clear on the amendment, Representative Haroldson, we are deleting section 2. And on the top of page 3, where 3 would become 2,
Correct, Madam Chair.
And then we would insert this new language, and then we're also deleting B on page 3.
That is correct, ma'am.
Okay, Director, is that how you see it? And Vice Chairman Newsom, are you clear with all that as his second? Committee, no, okay. Correct. Because it's unnecessary. Director Nesvick, would you, if you want to speak to why we're striking section B on page 3?
Yeah, so, maybe LSO has a reason why this is in here, but if this has an effective date on it and it goes into law and it's signed by the governor, I don't know why we would need that section B at all to do what we need to do or for this to become law. And maybe LSO has a thought on that. I don't know.
We can ask, but for now, we'll delete it and then, okay, so we have a motion on the table. Representative Jennings, anybody else have any comments? Did you have a comment?
I have a question.
Okay,
You want that in the comment section or the question?
question section. Is it a question for the bringer of the amendment?
Yeah, well, I don't know if he'll know or not. So I went and looked 23-6202 AV, and it states that it's when the offense is in a low misdemeanor. And so I guess I was going to ask the director.
Is your mic on?
Just on. Yeah. So I guess I was going to ask the question of, how are we defining this as a low or a high misdemeanor? Because the statute just above that talks about high misdemeanor.
Okay, we'll get an answer.
Yeah, so Madam Chair, I'm Representative Jennings. So in all of the Title 23 penalty section, all game and fish violations are separated into either low misdemeanors or high misdemeanors. And then unless otherwise provided in the statute. So this one, since it's a $5,000 fine, it puts, and there's no jail time associated with it, the way it's been amended, that would classify it as a low misdemeanor. That's consistent with what's in the low misdemeanor penalties now. I'm looking at it right now again too.
Chief King, hello.
Where's low misdemeanor?
We'll
at?
give you a minute. Representative Jennings.
Madam Chair, but we're leaving the $5,000 in place, but little v is up to 1,000. So it seems like there'd be a contradiction in here if we're leaving the penalty up to 5,000 and the low misdemeanor is up to 1,000.
Okay, go ahead and address that, Rick.
Madam Chairwoman, if I may.
Yes, please introduce yourself for the committee members who maybe don't know who you are.
Sure, thank you. My name is Rick King. I'm the Chief Game Warden with Wyoming Game and Fish Department. And so I think to address your question, so the subsection I, so if a person has already been suspended, a judge suspends their privilege to operate a watercraft, and then they violate that suspension, then the judge has this ability to specifically impose this penalty as provided in 23-6202A subsection Roman numeral 5. And so if you go to that section, then it's up to $1,000, to which may be added imprisonment for 6 months. And so I would look at this as kind of a stair-stepped incremental provision for each of the different violations that may occur. And so this just spells out specifically for the judge what he can impose and would direct the judge to 23-6202 to impose a penalty for that subsection I.
Follow up?
But thank you, Madam Chair Lady. But directly above that, it gives the latitude to go to $5,000. And yet we're referencing little 5, which then cuts that back to the only opportunity of $1,000.
Chief King?
Yeah, Madam Chairwoman,
Spelled out.
Representative Jennings. So the violation of not getting your boat inspected within 48 hours, that's very specific to this part of the statute where it says you could be fined up to $5,000 and lose your privileges for 3 years. And then if you subsequently break that suspension, then that's another violation. And that violation is tied specifically to this penalty statute.
Are you clear?
No, Madam
Oh,
Chair Lady.
Another question? Okay.
So as we progress down this habitual problem of defying the law, the penalty is going down. Am I correct in seeing that?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Jennings, you're right. So the penalty section in 23.6202A subsection 5 is a fine up to $1,000, but it does also include imprisonment up to 6 months. So a judge would have a discretion to say, you know, you're not getting the message here. Maybe the fines aren't working. Perhaps jail time may be an option, and that gives them the discretion to do that. So in terms of fine amounts, it is going down, but in terms of potential other options that a judge could impose, there are some further options in here.
Okay. Further questions? All right, so we have a motion on the table. Any further questions on the motion? Everybody's clear? All those in favor, please show of hands. It is unanimous, Carol. Thank you. Okay, we are back on the bill. Question being called on the bill. Please call roll.
Representative Banks.
Aye.
Representative Harrelson.
Aye.
Representative Jennings. Representative Knapp.
Aye.
Vice Chair Newsom.
Aye.
Representative Sweeney.
Aye.
Representative Williams.
Aye.
Representative Winter.
Aye.
Madam Chair Flitner.
Aye.
Madam Chair, there are 9 ayes.
Thank you, Carol. I appreciate it. Representative Haroldson, would you be willing to floor manage this? Okay, very good.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Chief King, Director Nesvick, thank you. And when you get back to the office this afternoon, could I get you guys just to maybe retype this and send it to me, and I'll make sure I get it to Carol right away, just so we're absolutely clear and we don't make any mistakes.
Chief King is all over that.
All right, thank you. Committee, we are adjourned unless there's, yes, Representative
Madam
Sweeney?
Chairman, I noticed we had quite a few people join us.
We did. I can't see them because they're camouflaged.
So,
Can we have them start testifying?
yeah,
Capital crew, these are hired neighbors from all over the state of Wyoming. Down here and witness it and be part of it. And be able to see their committee. I think they're gonna guys work on a lot of things that help what we have in our lives.
Thank you, Jess. Thanks. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Capitol. We're glad to have you. This is pretty dry stuff today. But don't, not at all. Well, good. Well, we're glad to have you. Okay, perfect. Thanks, Jess.
And Madam Chairman,
Yes,
I think they are hosting an event tonight.
they are. Mhm. Thank you for the invitation and thank you, Representative Sweeney. You guys enjoy your day. We'll see you later on. Thanks. Meeting adjourned.